Chapter 1. Genoa's Son, the Making of a Mariner. The Mediterranean of the 15th century was a restless stage of merchants, soldiers, and dreamers, a living mosaic of shimmering coastlines and ancient rivalries. The air smelled of salt and spice, of opportunity and danger. Genoa, one of Europe's proud maritime republics, rose from this world like a fortress carved from ambition. Its bustling harbors echoed with the shouts of traders, the creaking of timbered ships, and the murmur of stories brought across distant seas. It was into this vibrant, unforgiving world that Cristoforo Colombo was born in 1451, in a modest home tucked deep within the maze-like alleys of Genoa. His family were wool weavers, hard-working, humble, and far removed from the gilded courts of Europe. Yet the port city offered something far more valuable than wealth: exposure to the world beyond. From childhood, Columbus felt an irresistible pull toward the sea. While other boys played in crowded streets, he lingered near the docks, mesmerized. He watched waves crash against stone piers, studied the silhouettes of departing ships, and traced his fingers across weathered maps pinned inside shipwrights' workshops. Sailors returning from voyages spoke of lands drenched in sunlight, kingdoms where gold glinted in riverbeds, and islands so distant they seemed suspended at the edge of the world. These tales were his first teachers. As he grew older, his fascination hardened into determination. He apprenticed on merchant vessels, learning to tie knots, read the wind, and survive the unpredictable moods of the open ocean. By his teens, he was already traveling far from home, sailing along the dangerous coasts of North Africa, navigating the wine-rich ports of the Mediterranean, and once narrowly escaping death when corsairs attacked his ship. Each voyage carved deeper into his soul the belief that destiny awaited him somewhere beyond the horizon. Genoa had given him curiosity. The sea gave him purpose. When Columbus reached Lisbon, then Europe's beating heart of navigation, his world expanded yet again. The Portuguese were pushing further and further down the coast of Africa, armed with maps, astronomical instruments, and a hunger for empire. Columbus absorbed everything: geometry, Latin manuscripts, star charts. He spent long nights studying candlelit globes and long days questioning sailors who had ventured beyond known waters. He learned Portuguese, then Spanish. He sharpened his cartographic skills. He collected rumors, theories, legends. To some, he was merely a determined foreigner. To others, a man consumed by impossible ideas. Yet beneath the scholar and sailor grew a dream, one that shimmered just out of reach. Columbus believed the earth was round, like many scholars of his time, but he was convinced the oceans were smaller, the distances shorter, and that Asia could be reached by sailing westward across the Atlantic. If true, it would reshape trade, power, and the entire world map. It was a dream that demanded not just knowledge, but faith. Faith in his calculations, faith in his destiny, and faith that the unknown was not a void, but a doorway. And so began the journey of a Genoese weaver's son, transformed into a man who believed he could challenge the limits of the known world. Chapter 2. A Vision Against the Tide. By the late 15th century, Europe stood at a crossroads of curiosity and caution. Nations dreamed of reaching the riches of the East, its spices, its silks, its legendary empires, but the known routes were perilous. Caravans crossing deserts were prey to raiders. Ships rounding Africa faced storms that shattered fleets. Empires rose and fell along these corridors of commerce. In this atmosphere of ambition and uncertainty, Christopher Columbus carried an idea as fragile as parchment and as bold as prophecy. If the East could not be reached by land or by coasting Africa, then perhaps it could be reached by sailing into the wide, unknown Atlantic. To the courts of kings and queens, it sounded like madness. Most scholars accepted that the Earth was round, yet they also believed the ocean separating Europe from Asia was unimaginably vast, an expanse of darkness, monsters, and unbroken water. Columbus, however, clung to a different vision. Using flawed maps, ancient sources, and bold interpretation, he calculated a much shorter distance. It was wrong, but it was compelling. He believed the hand of God guided him, that he had been chosen not merely as a navigator, but as an instrument of divine purpose. This spiritual certainty became his armor against the ridicule he frequently endured. Columbus traveled from one royal court to another, carrying his proposal like a lantern in a storm. In Portugal, he met silence. In England, polite dismissal. In France, bureaucratic hesitation. Everywhere he went, courtiers smiled at his persistence, but scoffed at his mathematics. Yet Columbus refused to surrender. His obsession grew stronger with every rejection. He spent nights refining charts, recalculating distances, copying manuscripts, and praying for guidance. His dream was no longer only about continents and oceans. It was about destiny, legacy, and proving to the world that a man without noble birth could reshape history. In 1486, he arrived in Spain, exhausted but unbroken. The kingdom of Castile and Aragon pulsed with renewed confidence. After centuries of conflict, Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand had pushed the last Moorish stronghold from the Iberian Peninsula. Their banners now flew triumphantly across the land. Spain sought new horizons. Columbus was granted an audience. He stood in the royal court, an outsider, foreign, dressed plainly, but his voice carried conviction. Isabella and Ferdinand listened. They asked questions, then they hesitated. Scholars debated, advisors argued. Many warned that supporting Columbus would be gambling Spain's future on a delusion. Yet something in this tenacious mariner struck a chord. His certainty, his relentless pursuit, his unwavering belief. Years passed before the monarchs delivered their verdict. And then, in a moment shaped by political timing and perhaps spiritual instinct, 1492 changed everything. Columbus was given 3 ships, a small crew, provisions, and a promise. Should he succeed, he would carry the titles of Admiral of the Ocean Sea, Viceroy, and Governor of all lands he discovered. A portion of all wealth found would be his. Failure meant obscurity. Success meant immortality. As he stood on the docks of Palos, preparing for a voyage into waters known to few and feared by many, Columbus understood the weight of what lay ahead. He was no longer a supplicant seeking sponsorship. He was a commander, entrusted with Spain's hopes and his own unshakable dream. The tide had finally turned, and with it, the fate of 2 worlds. Chapter 3. The first voyage into the unknown dawn broke gently over the Andalusian coastline on August 3, 1492. The air felt still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. In the small port town of Palos de la Frontera, 3 ships, the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, rocked softly against the tide, their sails furled like folded wings awaiting flight. On the dock stood Christopher Columbus, eyes fixed on the horizon. The Atlantic stretched out before him, vast, shimmering, unknowable. To the sailors who had sworn their lives to this expedition, it was a terrifying void. To Columbus, it was a promise. The Niña was swift, the Pinta agile, and the Santa Maria, his flagship, solid and dependable. Together, they formed a humble fleet to challenge an ocean that dwarfed them in every imaginable way. As the townspeople gathered, some whispered prayers, others whispered fears. Mothers clutched their children. Old mariners shook their heads, convinced the ships would never return. Yet the sails rose, the anchors lifted, and with creaking timber and shouted commands, the fleet drifted away from the familiar world. It was not long before land faded behind them, swallowed by the horizon. Ahead lay nothing but water. Days turned into weeks. The Atlantic revealed its moods, calm skies melting into violent storms without warning. Towering waves slammed against hulls. The ships groaned under the weight of wind and sea. At night, the sailors gazed upward at a sky ablaze with unfamiliar stars. The ocean below was black and bottomless, its depths filled with mystery and dread. Columbus kept 2 logs, one with the true distances traveled and another to reassure his men that they were not straying too far from safety. Rumors spread. Some believed the ocean itself was widening to trap them. Others feared monstrous sea creatures or waters that boiled near the world's edge. Food rotted, fresh water spoiled, tempers flared. Whispered rebellion drifted through the night air like smoke. Yet Columbus remained steadfast. He paced the decks, studied seaweed drifting from unknown shores, watched flocks of birds passing overhead, and pointed toward the west with unshakable faith. Land is near, he would say again and again, but the horizon stayed empty. On the 35th day, at sea, the mood darkened dangerously. Murmurs of mutiny grew louder. Some sailors demanded they turn back. Others threatened outright revolt. Columbus pleaded for patience. 3 more days, he promised. If no land appeared, they would return to Spain. The ocean answered. In the early hours of those October 12th, under a moonlit sky, a cry pierced the silence. Rodrigo de Triana, atop the Pinta's lookout, shouted, "Tierra! Land!" The men rushed to the rails as a dark outline rose from the horizon like a miracle emerging from the sea. Columbus fell to his knees, tears mixing with salt spray. The impossible had become real. They had not reached Asia, though Columbus believed they had found its outer islands. In truth, they had arrived in the Bahamas, on an island he named San Salvador. The world had changed, even if they did not yet understand how profoundly. As the crew stepped onto warm sand, they were greeted by the Taino, curious, generous, adorned with ornaments of gold and shells. Columbus saw in their innocence a gateway to opportunity. He recorded every detail, searching for signs of wealth and power. Though he believed he stood at the doorstep of the East Indies, he was in fact closer to a new future, one that would reshape continents, cultures, and the fate of millions. And so the first voyage, born of desperation and daring, ended with the discovery of a world that had never been lost, only unknown to those who had crossed the ocean to find it. Chapter 4. The New World. Paradise and Power. The first light of morning settled over the island, Columbus named San Salvador, revealing landscapes unlike anything the Europeans had ever seen. Palm trees swayed in warm winds, carrying scents of fruit and flowers unknown to them. Waters sparkled in impossible shades of turquoise. Birds with vivid plumage streaked across the sky like living brushstrokes from a forgotten paradise. To Columbus and his crew, it was as though they had stepped into the pages of a medieval legend, an untouched world, blessed by nature and untouched by war. The Taino people, graceful and curious, watched the newcomers with a mixture of wonder and caution. Their bodies were adorned with simple jewelry, gold pieces that glimmered in the rising sun. To Columbus, that glimmer was not merely beauty, it was a sign, a hint of wealth, kingdoms, and untold riches hidden somewhere deeper within these islands. He saw paradise, yes, but also potential. The Taino lived in harmony with their environment. Their villages were built of woven thatch. Their canoes glided silently along the coastline. They offered food, shells, cotton, and hospitality. Their worldview did not include ownership of land or conquest of neighbors. They believed in community, reciprocity, and spiritual balance. This gentle world was about to collide with another defined by ambition, empire, and relentless hunger. Columbus moved from island to island, naming each in the name of Spain: Santa Maria de la Concepción, Fernandina, Isabella. Every shoreline became a claim. Every cross he erected symbolized dominion. His journals overflowed with descriptions of lush forests, fertile soil, and people he believed could be easily governed. He wrote to the Spanish crown with contagious excitement: "The land is abundant. The people are peaceful. They would make fine servants. With 50 men, we could subjugate them all." The words foreshadowed a future the Taino could not yet imagine. Months passed as Columbus and his crew explored the Caribbean. When the Santa Maria ran aground on Christmas Eve, its timbers were used to build a small fortress, La Navidad, the first European settlement in the New World. Columbus left dozens of men behind there, confident they would thrive in this paradise. When he set sail back to Spain in early 1493, he carried more than just gold trinkets and exotic animals. He brought several Taino captives, living proof of discovery. His return ignited Spain. Bells rang, crowds gathered, and Columbus was hailed as a hero, touched by Providence itself. The monarchs embraced him. Nobles showered him with honors. For a moment, he stood at the pinnacle of European fame. But beneath the triumph lay misunderstanding, exploitation, and a future painted in shadow. Spain responded to Columbus's discoveries not with caution, but with enthusiasm bordering on frenzy. A second expedition was ordered, magnificent in scale: 17 ships, over 1,000 men, horses, livestock, seeds, priests, soldiers, colonists. This was no longer exploration. This was conquest. When Columbus returned to the Caribbean, he expected to find La Navidad thriving. Instead, he found ruins, charred remains, and silence. The men he left behind had abused the Taino, fought amongst themselves, and ultimately been killed in retaliation. The dream of a peaceful new colony had collapsed before it even began. And yet, Columbus pushed forward. New settlements were built. New orders were imposed. The gentle rhythms of Taino life were broken, replaced by demands for labor, tribute, and obedience. The paradise Europeans first beheld would become a battleground for power, and the balance of two worlds, one ancient, one ambitious, would be forever altered. Chapter 5: Governance and Rebellion. When Columbus returned to the Caribbean for his second voyage, he did so not as a lone mariner chasing a dream, but as the appointed admiral of the ocean sea, commander of a vast colonial enterprise. His fleet of 17 ships sliced across the Atlantic like a floating city, filled with soldiers, settlers, craftsmen, priests, ambitions, and expectations. They did not arrive to explore, they arrived to rule. The islands that had once felt like paradise to weary sailors now became the stage for Spain's expansion. Fortresses arose where forests once stood, crosses were planted, banners unfurled, and laws declared. The rhythms of Taino life, fishing, farming, ceremonies, song, were replaced by foreign demands, forced labor, and tribute quotas. Columbus believed he had been entrusted with a divine mission to bring Christianity and civilization to these lands, but the methods he employed were shaped not by harmony, but by control. As governor, he imposed strict systems of tribute. Every Taino adult was ordered to deliver a quota of gold, cotton, or labor. Those who failed were punished harshly. The Spanish settlers, many of them hardened adventurers seeking quick wealth, grew restless and resentful. They expected rivers of gold, cities like those in Asia, and instant riches. Instead, they found endless forests, indigenous resistance, and grueling work. Tensions simmered. Some Spaniards accused Columbus of incompetence, claiming he hoarded gold or favored his Genoese allies. Others complained of hunger, disease, and the harsh conditions of frontier life. Many muttered that the admiral was unfit to govern. But resistance did not come only from the Europeans. In Hispaniola, the Taino people saw their land disappearing, their freedom diminishing, and their families torn apart. They had welcomed the newcomers with generosity. Now they faced enslavement. Across the island, whispers of rebellion began to spread, small sparks of defiance that would soon ignite into open revolt. Columbus responded with force. Campaigns were launched into the interior. Settlements were burned. Leaders were captured. Thousands were enslaved. The lush valleys and quiet villages of Hispaniola became places of fear and devastation. Yet even as he imposed order with an iron hand, Columbus struggled to maintain control. The very settlers Spain had sent to strengthen his authority became his greatest critics. They accused him of tyranny, corruption, and failure to deliver the wealth he had promised. His relationship with his own men fractured. The colony began to split into factions. Reports of chaos and brutality made their way back to Spain, carried by disgruntled colonists eager to undermine the admiral's rule. The crown, alarmed by the conflicting accounts, dispatched officials to investigate. Among them was Francisco de Bobadilla, a royal envoy granted sweeping powers to examine Columbus's governance. When Bobadilla arrived in 1500, he found a colony filled with conflict, starvation, distrust, and rage. Settlers lined up to file complaints. Natives spoke of enslavement and violence. The dream of the New World had rotted into disillusion. Columbus, once welcomed home as the hero who had expanded the boundaries of the world, suddenly found himself in chains. Shackled like a criminal, he was placed aboard a ship bound for Spain. It is said that he refused to remove the shackles during the entire voyage, even when offered freedom, wearing them as a symbol of injustice or perhaps as a testament to his own sense of martyrdom. When he stepped onto Spanish soil, the crowds who once cheered his triumph now whispered in confusion. How had the man who opened a new world fallen so far? The truth was tangled, part mismanagement, part political sabotage, part the inevitable collision of two civilizations. But one thing was certain: the age of Columbus, the explorer, was over. The age of Columbus, the embattled governor, had ended in humiliation. Yet his story was far from finished. Chapter 6: The Final Voyage. A man obsessed by 1502, time had worn down Christopher Columbus, but not his obsession. Stripped of titles, stained by scandal, and overshadowed by rivals, the aging admiral faced a world that no longer believed in him. Yet the fire inside him refused to die. When the crown offered him a fourth voyage, his last chance, Columbus seized it like a drowning man, grasping at the final piece of driftwood. Forbidden to return to Hispaniola, he turned his gaze toward the uncharted horizon. He sailed along the jagged coasts of Central America, convinced, desperately, feverishly, that somewhere beyond those dense green shores lay a hidden strait that would lead him to Asia. Each dawn found him on deck, scanning the mist, searching for a passage that did not exist. Nature, however, rose against him. Hurricanes stalked his fleet like living beasts, devouring sails and snapping masts. Torrential rains pounded the decks for days. Hostile tribes watched from the jungle shadows. Arrows poised, warnings whispered. Mutiny simmered among the weary crew as they drifted in an ocean that felt increasingly like a grave. And then came the shipwreck, a splintering crash in the dead of night. Columbus and his men were stranded on the shores of Jamaica, cut off from rescue, surrounded by uncertainty. For nearly a year, he survived through a mix of ingenuity, barter, and sheer theatrical bluff, predicting an eclipse to gain food, promising kings across oceans would avenge him if harmed. His body weakened, his vision blurred, his steps slow, his breath shallow. Yet his mind burned with the same audacious conviction that had driven him across the sea a decade earlier. In 1504, he was finally rescued and brought back to Spain. He returned not as a hero, but as a wrecked man, ignored by the court, forgotten by the powerful, eclipsed by a world already moving on. 2 years later, in Valladolid, Columbus breathed his last breath. He died still believing he had reached the Indies, unaware that he had stumbled into a continent unknown to his world, a land that would reshape human destiny, a man who dreamed too big to see the truth, or perhaps too consumed by belief to accept it. Chapter 7. Legacy. Between Glory and Grief. Columbus's voyages were more than journeys. They were turning points in human history. With his sails, continents collided. With his maps, empires were born. The Atlantic, once a mysterious void, became a highway of ambition, conquest, trade, and conflict. But light casts shadows. The same voyages that forged global connections also opened the floodgates to centuries of colonization. Millions were enslaved, cultures were dismantled, entire civilizations faced extinction under the weight of foreign rule, disease, and violence. The echoes of this trauma still ripple through the modern world. Columbus has become a symbol, a paradox. To some, he is a visionary who chased the impossible and stitched continents together. A man who refused to live within the boundaries of the known world. To others, he embodies genocide, greed, and the destructive hunger of European expansion. His statues stand tall in some cities and fall crashing down in others. His holiday sparks both parades and protests. His name is celebrated in textbooks and condemned in street debates. The truth is neither simple nor comfortable. Columbus was no saint, nor was he a singular villain. He was a man molded by the ambitions and moral limits of his age, brilliant, ruthless, flawed, and relentless. His legacy exists in the tension between glory and grief, a story carried on the wind of every ocean he once crossed. Chapter 8. Echoes of Exploration. Columbus did not just leave footprints in the sand. He carved pathways across the world. His voyage triggered a chain reaction that emboldened explorers like Amerigo Vespucci, whose name would grace the new continents, Magellan, who circled the globe, and Cortez, who toppled empires. The age of discovery unfurled into the age of empire. Maps were rewritten, stretching across oceans and deserts. Borders dissolved and reformed. Cultures blended, clashed, and evolved. Entire worldviews shifted as the planet shrank and horizons expanded. The consequences were immense. New foods crossed oceans: potatoes, tomatoes, horses, sugar, changing diets and economies forever. Migration reshaped nations. Trade connected hemispheres. But alongside growth came domination, enslavement, and centuries of global inequality. Columbus's legacy still pulses through our world today, in the people who cross borders, the debates about identity, the struggles over history and memory. His story is not merely about ships, sails, and maps. It is a story about belief, wild, unshakable belief, about the courage and the cost of stepping into the unknown, about the world that waits when ambition meets discovery. Chapter 9. The World Before Columbus. Long before Columbus's sails rose over the Atlantic, the Americas were vibrant, ancient, and alive. Millions of people thrived across vast landscapes, from the towering pyramids of the Maya to the empire of the Inca, suspended in the Andes, to the bustling cities of the Mississippian culture along the great rivers of North America. These civilizations built astronomical observatories, engineered advanced agricultural systems, crafted intricate art, and traded across thousands of kilometers. Their histories were rich, their cultures complex, their worlds complete. The idea that Columbus discovered a new world erases all that came before. His arrival was not a dawn, it was a collision. Two hemispheres met with explosive force. The Columbian Exchange reshaped the planet. Corn, potatoes, and cacao traveled east. Horses, wheat, and steel sailed west. But so did plague, so did conquest, so did systems of forced labor that devastated entire peoples. Smallpox swept through native communities like a silent fire, wiping out millions. Enslavement shattered families, traditions, and generations. The exchange birthed new worlds and destroyed old ones. Its legacy remains a tapestry woven with brilliance and tragedy.